Ladies and gentlemen, and this is Germany in Two-Front War and the Schlieffen-Plan. The Great War, Week 2 of the channel, The Great War. Austria-Hungary starts the bombardment of Belgrade. What follow is a deployment race of armies between all major powers in Europe. Nobody wants to be unprepared in the case of an attack. I mean, yeah, it's not a joke to mobilize, right? It takes a long time, and it's especially mobilize and move the army to the border. It's not some joke. Germany is implementing the Schlieffen-Plan. The idea is to avoid a two-front war by conquering Paris via Belgrade. Yeah, so they're like, fuck it. We're just gonna attack the France because, not the France. We're gonna attack France because we know the France is gonna join in anyway, so they just attacked France. After that, the full attention would be diverted to Russia. One thing gets clear in the first days at the Western Front, this war is going to be different. This was modern warfare. Yeah, so they're like, yeah, okay, we don't want two-front wars because that's just disaster in any time. If you go in history in any time, if doesn't matter how great someone is or some country is, two-front war is always disaster. So they're like, okay, we'll just take France like that, and then just focus on Russia. Yeah, it didn't work out that way. So it's gonna be fun. Yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, because they attacked Belgium, right? They go through the Belgium, even though they said no, right? Britain said, no, and they just went through Belgium. Yeah, that caused them the massive setback there with all the trench warfare and all the horrible things. So let's watch it. Remember, if you like my reaction, like, subscribe, check out the reaction. There's a link in the description. Check the cast for praise, link cards, and yeah, let's watch it.
My name is Indy Nidal, and welcome to the Great War.
Yeah, this intro.
We left off last time with the Austro-Hungarian Empire declaring war on the Kingdom of Serbia. And I'm going to begin today with a couple of telegrams. Now, in Russia, there were very real fears that Austria's plans might extend to more than just Serbian occupation or Serbian punishment. Russia thought that Serbia might actually lose her independence. You see, Austria had mobilized 3/4 of her army, which was way more than enough to deal with Serbia. So on July 29th, as Austria began bombarding Belgrade, Russia partially mobilized her army just in case. The Tsar, though, did not want a war with Germany, who had pledged to support Austria-Hungary. So he telegraphed his cousin, Kaiser Wilhelm, quote, "To try to avoid such a calamity as a European war, I beg you, in the name of our old friendship, to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far." End quote. He signed it, Nicky. At the same time...
Yeah, so, Extra History is a great channel, right? Extra Credits. They usually just cover the, main wars. But, there was one of the series about World War I. Which was basically, before World War I started, all the politics and all the background things where people were just rushing and how pressure that was. That was a great series. I reacted to that. In that, obviously, I realized that, wait a minute, Tsar of Russia and, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany is basically cousins. Like, what the hell?
The Kaiser was telegraphing back, quote, "I am exerting the utmost influence to induce the Austrians to deal straightly, to arrive at a satisfactory understanding with you." End quote. This was signed, Willie. However, that same day, the German fleet began to mobilize, and in response, the British fleet was sent to its war stations in the North Sea in case of a possible attack. Now, at that point, the allied pair of France and Russia were putting pressure on Britain to declare that in case of a German attack on Russia's ally France, Britain would join the war. But Britain, especially the Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey, wouldn't commit. Okay, important stuff now.
So France is like, okay, Britain, see, Germany might attack. You got my back, right? You got my back. Yeah, backing French. Yeah, we'll think about that.
Germany told Britain in a secret message that if Britain remained neutral, Germany would take no territory from France except her colonies. This provoked the opposite effect, though, showing Grey once and for all that Germany was committed to going to war against Russia. Now, in Russia on the 29th, there was no declaration of war, but a draft of nearly 6 million men began, and the army was already moving towards the Austrian border. And it was at 5 p.m. on July 30th that the Russian general mobilization began. See, the Tsar finally signed this order because of partial German mobilization and his worries about being unready on the Polish front.
Oh God, knowing how World War I went and how many people died, seeing all those people just marching there, knowing the lots of them are going to die.
All actually got a little confusing here. Okay, German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg telegraphed Vienna not to mobilize against Russia, but the same day, German Chief of Staff Moltke telegraphed his opposite Austrian number Conrad, mobilize at once. So who was really in charge? And then Germany sent Russia an ultimatum to stop all war measures of any kind against Austria and Germany within 24 hours. This was rejected. Now you could see that this was becoming a real mess, but at the end of July, all of the various armies were pressuring their political leaders because many of the leaders were against the war, but the armies were afraid of being unready and they all wanted to move as quickly as possible. On July 29th, a German ultimatum to Belgium...
It's just like, weird domino effect, right? I mean, nobody wants a war at that point. Everybody's just rushing, okay, everybody just chill out. But then, just a whiff that somebody could attack, they have to mobilize. Now the other side, now they have to mobilize because they cannot be prepared. But yeah, I don't want to fight, but I have to mobilize just in case. And that will basically move the cog forward, one step more closer to the war. And eventually everybody's mobilized and they just fight. That is just weird domino effect.
Belgium was prepared. What? Belgium? What, little neutral Belgium? Why Belgium, you ask? Here's why. See, if Germany was going to war with Russia, she could not help but be worried about France invading her from behind because, again, France and Russia were committed allies. So here was the idea, the moment you've all been waiting for.
Yeah. So before you think, why Belgium? So, now in defense of Germany, Belgium did do the biggest atrocity of them all, being neighbor to Germany. So that is their fault. Belgium's like, okay, this is going to be a trend, right? You're going to do this quite often.
The Schlieffen-Plan. Alfred von Schlieffen had been the German Army Chief of Staff from 1891 to 1905, and here was his big idea in case of a war with both Russia and France. France would have to be knocked out of the war immediately so all of the troops could focus on the more daunting task of attacking Russia, okay? So Germany would make a swift attack through Holland and Belgium, completely bypassing the heavily defended Franco-German border and sweeping down into...
Yeah, see, that's the thing. France and Germany, there is, all the forts in the between, right? That is the same reason why Hitler invaded Belgium and that from there, took over the France. So basically, whenever France built those forts between Germany and France and not at the Belgium side, Belgium's like, this is gonna be bad, right? Because everybody's just gonna go through me now.
...to Paris from the north. Moltke streamlined the plan a bit by skipping Holland, but the idea was to take Paris within 6 weeks and thus avoid a two-front war. Now, we'll go into that in more depth later. But Belgium was neutral, and Britain had a treaty with her. And on July 31st, Britain asked France and Germany if they would respect Belgian neutrality. France said yes, but Germany did not respond. So Britain eventually sent an ultimatum of her own.
Did not respond. That's the best thing that always gets me, right? Britain sends the letter and Germany just like, hey, what was that? Did you hear something? I guess there was a postman outside. I'll just ignore it.
If Belgium were attacked, Britain would go to war. In all of these countries, people were enlisting like crazy, and nationalistic fever was going off the rails. In France, for example, Jean Jaurès, leader of the Socialist Party, who was appealing to all the European working classes to stop the war, was assassinated on the 31st. Ironically, this actually caused more shock around Europe than Franz Ferdinand's assassination did. But it showed that in France there was a great deal of enthusiasm for the war. See, many people wanted revenge for the loss against Prussia over 40 years earlier. Back to Russia and Germany. Now, the day after Russia mobilized, Germany also mobilized. Now, this was presented in the Reichstag as purely defensive, okay? We have to mobilize to defend ourselves because they did it first. And this was pretty much the only way the German military high command could convince the Social Democrats to agree with the mobilization. And on the evening...
I mean, that's just fucking weird, right? I mean, there's a disagreement between, Russia and Germany right now. So they are trying to take over France quickly so they can take care of Russia later on. That is their plan. And they're just like, oh, see, they mobilized it first. We didn't. So we are in the clear here. It's their fault. But why did they mobilize? France has nothing to do with nothing, right? But France knows you're going to invade them. That's why they're mobilizing in the first place.
Evening of August 1st, the German ambassador gave Russia the German declaration of war, which resulted from Russia rejecting the German ultimatum to stand down. Actually, as it turned out, the German ambassador actually gave the Russians two versions of the declaration of war. One that claimed Russia refused to respond to Germany, and one that said the Russian response was unacceptable. Yep, that's the kind of thing you want to avoid in a diplomatic service. The Kaiser at first ordered an attack on only Russia, but Moltke convinced him this wasn't really possible since most of the army was already committed in the West, and that evening, German troops entered Luxembourg to secure the telegraph and the railways. Here we go. On August 2nd, German troops crossed into France for the first time in over 40 years, and there were several small border skirmishes. At 7 that evening, Germany gave Belgium an ultimatum. Give German troops free passage through Belgium. Belgium refused. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on France, and that same day occupied 3 towns in Russian Poland. On August 4th, German troops entered Belgium, and Britain declared war on Germany. Now, many of those in England who had been anti-war before were suddenly very much for the war. Grey, the Foreign Secretary, for example, now believed that if Germany wasn't stopped, then all European national independence was just a fiction. In the Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire began mining the Dardanelles on August the 3rd. Now, the Turks were not yet going to war, and we'll see more of them in a few weeks. But what of Serbia? I mean, this whole thing snowballed because of issues between Serbia and Austria-Hungary, right? Well, we're going to get into that in much more depth next week, I promise. Now, in much of Europe, there was huge optimism about the war. I mean, everybody really thought that they were going to win. Even though by this time there were several million soldiers marching around Europe, this was still the war that would be over by Christmas. The Russian High Command, for example, asked for new typewriters, but were told that the war would not be long enough to justify the expense.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's the best thing about Germany, right? I'm not trying to diss them or anything, but during the World War I, even in World War II, even though in World War II, some of the things Nazis just achieved was just ridiculous. So I guess that, that kind of ego is justified. But I don't know. It was just over before you know it. So basically, this World War I started because Ottoman Empire was getting weak. Serbia got its independence, and then Austria suddenly jumped in and took over. So there was massive tension, and it all sparked this thing basically. So if Ottoman Empire was still strong, maybe there wouldn't have been World War I. That's a weird and effed up way of seeing it, but yeah.
Because of all this, everyone's military plans called for huge immediate attacks, since there seemed to be no point saving resources for later when you could just win right now.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. The wars people looked back on were short wars like the Franco-Prussian War, but they really should have looked at the American Civil War to get an idea of how long and how bloody modern warfare was going to be.
Yeah.
All right, on August 5th, the German Empire reached her first serious military obstacle, Liege. Now, that day, the Germans failed to take any of the 12 forts of the city. Ludendorff managed to enter Liege on the 7th, but taking the forts was necessary for the German advance. Germany brought in her big guns, and this was accomplished in only a few days. But this is really important.
Literally big guns. Okay, I don't get it. Germany thought that the war is not going to be, that long. But why did they just, just like, France, fine, but even Britain, right? Britain is involved now. Yeah, it's going to be a quick war. They even discredited Britain, like Britain's not going to pose much of threat. What? And Britain's like, oh yeah, is that how it is? You're going to ignore my later? We are at war. Sharpen my tank. And then they introduce the tank later on.
You see, France and Belgium had strategically placed fortresses all over them. They were very expensive and heavily defended. But one of the first things the war showed was the technological advance in artillery. Heavy howitzers could bombard fortresses from 10 miles away without real fear of retaliation. And the fortresses were just sitting ducks. So all of the fortresses attacked in 1914 fell real quickly, and all that money and all that effort to build them up was for nothing. So, to bring us up to date, on August the 6th, Austria-Hungary officially declared war on Russia, and Serbia declared war on Germany. If you want to know what happened in the last episode, click right here.
Yeah, I mean, when Bismarck basically unified Germany, Bismarck created a monster, right? Because it was a scientific hub, it was really economical hub too, before World War I. So they were kind of, swimming in money and technology, but still, the bit of hubris was getting in the way, right? They're like, it's going to be quick war. I mean, if it's just France, I understand that, but Britain was involved too. I mean, Britain was not weak. I mean, around this time, Britain was nowhere near weak, right? I mean, I don't know. Right, well, there was a Germany in True Front War and the Schlieffen-Plan by the channel The Great War. If you like my next one, like, subscribe, check out the week's Sunday, there's a link in the description. Check out the cast for place, link cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.